Shabbat Shalom, good afternoon. Welcome to the Assembly of Yah here at Marseilles, Illinois. Today, it is the 3rd of November, 2012. It's kind of cloudy, it's 50 degrees. We're into the semi-winter time now, and it's chilly outside, but it's warm in here, especially with the Spirit of Yahweh and Yeshua. Thank you for being with us. We have an interesting message today. The title of this is A Memorial to Stephen. We're going to do a look at how the circumstances in Jerusalem arose to place Stephen in a position that he was very vulnerable, and he was taken by the Sanhedrin with lying witnesses and killed illegally. A righteous man who was selected by the Spirit and the apostles, full of good works, power, miracles, a set-apart spirit, and a man that did much preaching and did much good, was taken by the Sanhedrin and illegally tried and stoned. And we're going to look at that entire message. So it's kind of a sad message today, but all this was in Yeshua's will. It was all allowed by Yeshua, and of course he was overlooking and directing the apostles and everything in Jerusalem very, very specifically. Stephen's death showed great boldness in his testimony, his life, and he was not afraid. We're not supposed to have fear, and he did not fear the Sanhedrin, who had authority to put him to death, or the Romans. But you know, if I don't say it later, I want to make sure I say it now. Stephen's being killed and being stoned was consented to and helped by Shaul, Paul, that we know as the Apostle Paul, that came in later after time. Maybe without that guilt and without that shame that was placed upon him when he was knocked off his horse in Acts chapter, I believe it's chapter 8, without that guilt and shame, and him realizing what he had done with Stephen and persecuting the assembly and making havoc of them in Jerusalem, everybody was fleeing Jerusalem. It may be that Shaul might not have repented and come into the priesthood, the apostleship, a man out of time. Yeshua used his grief and his shame to help convert him. We're going to talk about Stephen in a few minutes, but right now we're going to turn the program over to Beverly for praise and singing and worship as we normally do. Hallelujah.
Turn your songbooks to number 37. We're going to sing this first. He paid a debt he did not owe. Number 45. There is coming a day. When no heartaches 37, thou art worthy. Comes out of Revelations 4:11. With number 78. Hallelujah. Out of Psalms 19:14.
Praise Yeshua, praise Yahweh. Thank you, Beverly. Just as a reminder, Yahweh of the Old Testament is basically Yeshua 99% of the time. So when we're praising here Yahweh, and it comes out of the Psalms or out of the Proverbs or someplace out of the Old Testament, we're really talking about Yeshua. But when we say that name Yahweh, we're really saying Yahweh and Yeshua both, because they both are working together, they're both Echad. We're going to take our time now to make our prayers and requests known before Yahweh and Yeshua. Remember, when we're baptized and we're in Yeshua's hands, he is our husband, most of our prayers go to him. And we're going to pray especially today and ask you to pray no matter when you get this for Pat and Nicole Fowler, who live over in Fort Wayne. They're having some financial difficulties. Some people are taking advantage of them. They need a place to live, a good place to live. They want to find a house or an apartment for this winter time, because right now they are staying with some friend's house, in a friend's house. And we ask you, would you pray that Yahweh and Yeshua provide a nice apartment or house for them to live for this winter time, so they can have their own place. And we ask you also that when you pray, especially in the Sabbath day that belongs to Yeshua, that you would add your voice and say this when you pray, that you add your voice. We add our testimony to all the prayers of the different assemblies, like Roachport, YRM, Kingdom City, Panama City, Kenyon Gandhi's group, and Sam Graham's group up in Eden Rapids. So we are all together in agreement with prayers and have this spirit of cooperation together in the body. We'll be back with you shortly with the main message. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Before I start talking about Stephen, one of the 7 men that were chosen by the apostles to become deacons, had their hands laid on them, receive the fullness of the Spirit, I would like to mention Romans 8:28. All things work to good for those who love Yahweh and called according to his purpose. We don't understand the early martyrdom, especially just a deacon out of the assembly, how Yahshua could allow this to happen. But as we said earlier today, it had a purpose, and a great purpose, a great purpose. We sang songs today and every day, every Sabbath, about the sacrifice, the shame, the guilt, the beatings, the bloodletting, the abuse, and the martyrdom, the killing of Yahshua and his torture for us. We know Yahshua died for us. He didn't die for us, he died for each one of us individually. You, particularly, he died for. Especially if you're watching this film. You were called, you were probably chosen, and he died for you and me. That gives us a relationship. But I tell you the truth today, that Isaiah, who was sawed in half in a log, alive, all the apostles except John who were martyred, Stephen, James who was beheaded by Herod, and many, many others that were persecuted, even Zechariah who was killed between the altar and the temple by the leadership at that time. They all died for us. And they died for the will of Yahshua and died for Yahshua. Didn't they? They died for the testimony. They died for their witness. They died for their walk. They died for the truth. And we are kinsmen to them. They are our family. And we will see them soon again. The death of Stephen is not an individual isolated incident. The righteous have been persecuted and even killed since the time of Abel. Righteous Abel, whose blood crieth out even today from the ground. When I read about Stephen and Yahshua and the patriarchs, our forefathers, to me, it's like today. It's like yesterday, a few hours ago. It's like being right there at the time it's happening. And feeling that grief and feeling that sorrow and horror of how, and this question that comes up like thunder, how could this possibly happen to the righteous? But Yahweh and Yeshua have a purpose. Yahweh and Yeshua have a purpose. The Pharisees and the leadership of Israel from even before the time of Yahshua became corrupt. And we're going to see that even more today in this message. But we're going to talk about Stephen, so I'd like to start and describe who Stephen was. Let's go to Acts chapter 3, verse 6. Acts chapter 6, verse 3. And in Acts chapter 6, it says, in those days, verse 1, when the number of disciples was multiplied, and many people were coming in, there arose a murmuring among the Grecians against the Hebrews that the widows were neglected in the daily administration of food and clothes and such, whatever they needed. And the 12 called the multitude of the disciples unto them, all these people, maybe 70, maybe 120 again. They called all the people together and said, it's not reasonable that we should leave the word of Yahweh and serve tables. They were studying, they were praying, they were ministering, they were traveling. In verse 2, verse 3 it says, therefore, brethren, look out among you 7 men. Choose 7 men of honest report, full of the set-apart spirit, wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business of deacons and waiting on tables and the daily ministration of the widows and the poor and things that had to be done in the assembly. An important business. It sounds menial, but it's an important business. Who are they going to choose? Just anybody? We're only waiting on tables. Who cares, right? No. They wanted people who were honest, a good reputation, full of the Spirit, wisdom, to appoint over the business. This was an important decision, and they wanted men of quality that were called to an office slightly below that of an apostle. It was important. It was an honorable calling, a very, very important calling to the people that they worked for, and of course to Yeshua. And I believe Yeshua was guiding this. So they gave themselves over in verse 4 continually to prayer and ministering of the word for the apostles. And so they said this to the group in verse 5. They said, and the saying pleased the whole multitude. And they chose Stephen, full of faith, set apart spirit. Notice he's mentioned first here. Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenius, Nicholas, proselyte of Antioch, whom they set before the apostles, and when they had prayed and laid their hands on them to anoint them for a position. Now this was powerful because the apostles had carte blanche power. I mean, these guys were anointed for this job, and they received an anointing, more power, more spirit, more wisdom to do this job, and because they had the word and the witness, and they were part of that ministry, to go out and preach. They were also preachers, ministers of the word. They weren't just waiters. Verse 7, and the word of Yahweh, Elohim, increased, and the number of disciples multiplied in Jerusalem greatly, and a great company of the priests, this is talking about the leadership, the Sanhedrin, the priests of Israel, also were obedient to the faith. Verse 8, now here's another statement about Stephen. We're getting ready for his oration. Stephen, full of faith and power, did great wonders and miracles among the people. But, here we see in verse 9, and Satan and wicked people use lies to get their ways. Because the righteous are standing in truth, right? They're not doing anything wrong. So here come, in verse 9, there arose a certain of the synagogue, which is called the synagogue of the Libertines, and the Cyrenians, and Alexandrians, and of them of Cilicia, of Asia, disputing with Stephen. They didn't like him. They didn't like what he was doing. Obviously, they did not follow the same faith. All right? They didn't follow the same faith. And we believe that these were basically people who were following the Judaic faith. They were basically Torah keepers, but they believed that this new calling, this new message, this new life by Yeshua was against everything that they stood for and believed since the time of Moshe. And they saw Stephen and the apostles as an extension, as part of the ministry of Yeshua, and they hated them and they hated their message. They did not believe in Yeshua. We need to understand that. They did not believe in Yeshua and his message. So I want to ask you a question. Did Yeshua teach against the law, against Torah? Of course not. He said not one yod, not one tittle should be removed, right? Did he teach against any of the law, Torah that it was laid down at all? No, he didn't. In fact, he lifted up. He lifted up Torah. Now these guys came together, and they were not able to resist the wisdom of the Spirit by which Stephen spoke. Verse 11. And they secretly instigated men or hired men, which said, we have heard him, this is Stephen, have heard of him, speak blasphemous words against Moshe, that means Torah, okay, and against Yahweh. And they stirred up the people and the elders and the scribes, and they came upon him, and they caught him, and they brought him under the council. Why did they feel moved to do this, and the freedom and the liberty to bring Stephen to the Sanhedrin? Because the Sanhedrin thought the same way. They believed the same way, and they believed that they were moving and doing these things with the unspoken, silent permission of the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin would be supportive of them and do something to Stephen. In other words, they were coming from the same direction. The leadership of Israel at that time, called the Sanhedrin, under Caiaphas. So they brought him into the council. 13. And set up, now this is the word of Yahweh I'm reading here, they set up false witnesses. The witnesses were liars, which said, this man ceases not to speak blasphemous words against this holy place. He's talking about the temple and Jerusalem, okay, and the Torah, the law. All right, this is important now, what is the accusation against Stephen? Not that he believed in Yeshua, or he believed in the resurrection of the dead or the life to come. That he was speaking something in the time frame that would be infamous, damaging, unlawful, an illegal act to the people of the very time at that moment. He wasn't going to complain about this guy follows Yeshua. There was lots of people in Jerusalem that believed in Yeshua. They wanted something more specific that they could lay down before the Sanhedrin, that the Sanhedrin would condemn Stephen and punish him, maybe even put him to death. And notice what it says, false witnesses. Yeshua was brought with false testimony, false witnesses, to the Sanhedrin, right? And before Pilate. And he got a false trial in the middle of the night, illegal trial, kangaroo court, and he was condemned without due process. He did not get due process at that time. They're about to do the same thing to Stephen, except that this is going to be before the Jewish Sanhedrin instead of taking him to Rome, to the Roman law. False witnesses. And the legal points are that he speaks blasphemous words against the temple in Jerusalem and Torah. For we heard him say that this Yeshua of Nazareth shall destroy this place and shall change customs which Moshe delivered us. And all that sat in the council looked steadfastly upon Stephen, looked upon him, verse 15, saw his face as it had been the face of an angel. This man had no guilt, he had no shame, the man had a beautiful countenance, and he was there by the set-apart Spirit. I'd like to ask you a question now. Did Yeshua preach against that place and against Torah? Yes, he did. He did. Remember that Yeshua is the spirit of prophecy. I think you can find that in Revelations 19:3, 19:4, right in there. He is the spirit of prophecy, and a lot of things that he spoke to his 12 disciples was prophecy of things to come. Remember that in Matthew 24, the apostles bring Yeshua to the temple. And they say, look at the grandeur and the gold and the rubies, and look at this wonderful place. Isn't this magnificent? And they were all excited about being in ground zero, being in the Kodesh place. And Yeshua said, you know, I tell you the truth, that this is all going to be torn down and destroyed. Not brick, not one stone upon another is going to be remaining. Did he prophesy against Jerusalem and the temple? He sure did. Because he was prophesying that approximately 36 years from that moment he said that, in 70 AD, the Romans were going to come and destroy the temple and tear it all down and melt down the gold, melt down the silver and the holy things. Did he speak against the temple? Yes. But there was a reason for that, because even Stephen said that Yahweh does not live in temples, does not live in buildings. We have, after the death and resurrection of Yeshua, we became the temple of the set-apart Spirit. And because of their blasphemy, because of the wickedness of the leaders of that time and what they were doing and how they were afflicting the people and lying to the people through Judaic practices and traditions of the elders, which he condemned, he was going to make sure, Yeshua was going to make sure that the Romans tore the temple down. And he knew that. And he told the disciples. And the disciples, not understanding completely the prophecy of that, told other people in table talk and discussions. They didn't preach that because that's not Yeshua, but they talked about that. So charge number 1. Was he speaking against the temple? Yes. Charge number 2. Was it a crime that he spoke against the temple? No. Charge number 2 is that he said that one will come, or that actually Torah should be changed. That Torah was not correct, that Torah should be changed, and they were saying here that he was speaking against the law. That's Torah. Do you think that Stephen was teaching against the law? Yes, I think he was. There's 2 kinds of laws that we've pointed out here, and if you studied, you understand. When you look at the first 5 books, which we call Moses or Torah, the first 5 books, you have in there over 100 different statutes and laws that are now changed. We don't do animal sacrifice anymore. All changed and gone away. But they did it at this time. So if he said, we're not going to kill any more animals for sin, he's speaking against the law, isn't he? If he says, we're not going to worship in this temple anymore, when it was said in the Old Testament, Jerusalem was the place to worship at the temple. It was the Kodesh place. That's where you had to go. He said that the Levitical priesthood would probably be changed. We're going to be under a new priesthood. Maybe he said that. Would he be speaking against the first 5 books? Yes, he would. But was he speaking the truth? Yes. Was he speaking by the Spirit? Yes, he was. But they didn't understand that. But even though he was doing this, it wasn't a crime. They considered it a crime. They considered it blasphemy, which is punishable by death. Where is it written down? Whatever the high priest decides. Stephen was speaking the truth. They didn't like it, but we have to understand the undertow and the underfeelings that are going on here. This leadership hated Yeshua. They made sure that Yeshua was killed. They were making havoc of everybody who believed in him and driving everybody out of Jerusalem, led primarily by Saul. There was a feeling in this group that this new sect, this new religion, so to speak, of the Nazarenes, of Yeshua, was blasphemy. They killed the ringleader. It was wrong. It was against Torah. And it threatened their leadership and position. And they even said that if we don't get rid of this guy, Rome is going to come and take our place. It says they were moved with jealousy. When the apostles, Peter and John, were preaching, they were moved with jealousy that so many people were crowding to hear what they had to say at the temple. They were moved with jealousy and they had him thrown in jail. These leaders, for the most part, were evil, corrupt, carnal. They devoured widows' houses. They were evil. They were evil, and they were set on murder. Yeshua told them, the works of of Satan you will do. Your father. He said, your father, you have your father the devil. Let's go to Acts 4:18. Before Stephen was killed in Acts 4:18, Peter and John were preaching Yeshua. And the Sanhedrin heard about this, and they were very angry, and they called him in. And in 18 it says, and they called them and commanded them not to speak at all, nor teach in the name of Yeshua. And they threatened them. And they had healed this man, and they brought this all in. They wanted to know, well, how did you heal this man, and what name by which did you heal this man? And after they heard their testimony, they threatened them. Later they beat them and let them go because they were preaching in the name of Yeshua. They hated this whole thing about Yeshua in this new way. They hated this. I find the testimony, when I've read Stephen's testimony before he was stoned in Acts chapter 7, which we're going to go there in a minute, kind of confusing, because they had these two charges laid against him, but when he stood there in chains before them, he started talking about Abraham and talking about things of the history of Israel out of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that didn't seem to apply to the charges. He didn't seem to be defending himself against the charges that he might be set free. But before we go there and see what Stephen had to say, because I want to point out some things of what he said and what they mean, I'd like to go to Matthew 23. Let's go over there. And I want to give you Yeshua's opinion of the leadership of that time. 23, he finally is cutting loose with everything that he had to say in his opinion of the scribes and Pharisees, leadership of that day, who continually in his ministry in Jerusalem tempted him, sent lawyers and teachers to him so they could catch him in his words and accuse him of something illegal, maybe even kill him. They were after him all the time. And he spoke to them up to Matthew 23, up to this moment. He spoke to them in kind, reverent, respectable terms, giving them answers to their questions. Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife? Should we pay taxes to Caesar? This woman was caught in adultery. What should we do? What do you say? And he gave them Torah, legal, proper, scriptural answers. But he didn't rail on them. He didn't make them mad. But now he cuts loose on them and tells them exactly what he, Elohim of Israel, thinks of this leadership. And this is the leadership he's talking about that judged Stephen. Let's go to Matthew 23, verse 13. And there's like 8 woes. 8 woes he pronounces. Now these are curses against these people. Yeshua is putting curses on this leadership, who are already accursed people anyway, because they're not keeping Torah. They're lying and stealing and cheating. He says in verse 13, but woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for ye neither go in yourselves, in other words, you don't do right, you're not keeping Torah, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in. You're a blockade. You're keeping others from going in because of your wickedness. 14, woe number 2. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye devour, and this is what is said later in Acts, for you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayer, therefore ye shall receive the greater damnation. There is nothing worse, except maybe the sin of witchcraft. There's nothing worse than to devour the poor, the blind, the halt, the widows' houses and what they have, and arrest a poor man in his judgment or his rights. There's nothing worse. Verse 15. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye compass sea and land to make one proselyte. You scour the whole countryside to find one guy that'll believe in you. And when he is made like one of you, it says here, ye make him twofold the son of hell or Gehenna than yourselves. You make him twice as bad as what you are. So they were bringing more men in to be even worse than they were. Remember what it says? When a demon is cast out, he goes to dry waters places and he can't find rest. He's talking to the Pharisees, and he comes back and he finds that man that he left all inside swept and garnished and cleaned, and he brings 7 spirits worse than himself, and the last state of the man is worse than the first. This is what he's talking about. They were getting worse and worse and worse. And he's suggesting that they are demonic. 16, verse 16, we're in Matthew 23:16. Woe unto you, ye blind guides, which say, whosoever shall swear by the temple is nothing, but whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he is a debtor. He sinned. Yeshua said, you fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gold of the temple, the gold, or the temple that sanctifies the gold? They couldn't decide between good and evil. They were blind, completely, absolutely blind. Verse 23. 23. And he that shall swear by heaven sweareth by the throne of Yahweh and by him that sitteth thereon. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees. 23. Hypocrites, for ye pay tithe and mint, anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law: judgment, correct judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought ye to have done, and not leave the others undone. They didn't have any wisdom at all. And they did not have mercy. They did not have faith. They did not have righteousness. They did not have Torah. Verse 25. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye may clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess. Thou blind Pharisees, cleanest first with that which was within the cup and platter. He's talking about them, that the outside of them may be clean also. They cleaned the outside. They looked good. They wanted to look good to the people who were there. Clean robes and wearing tzitzis and all kinds of things, you know, and walking with great pious pomp, seeking the reverence and the acceptance of men. But inside, they are hypocrites, full of dead men's bones. 27. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye you are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful on the outside, but are within full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanness. See, we're supposed to be clean. They're filled with everything that's unclean. 29. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because ye build the tombs of the prophets, and you garnish them, the sepulchres of the righteous. And you say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. We wouldn't have been partakers. We wouldn't have been part of that. We wouldn't have done that. Wherefore ye witness unto yourselves, Yeshua said, that ye are the children of them which kill the prophets. You're just like them. 32, he says, you fill up the full measure of your fathers. Ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, exactly what John the Baptist said. How can ye escape damnation of Gehenna fire? Wherefore, behold, I send unto you the prophets, I send unto you. This is Yahshua speaking, the Elohim of Israel, Yahweh. I send unto you the prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them ye killed and impaled, and some of them ye scourged in your synagogues and persecuted them from city to city, that upon you, scribes and Pharisees, he's talking about in 35, may come upon you all the righteous blood upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you slew. Between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all these things, all these judgments will come upon you in this generation. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them, which were sent unto thee, how often I would have gathered you, thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chicks under her wings, and you would not. Behold, I say unto you, Yeshua said, behold, this is prophecy, your house is left desolate. He's talking about the temple. The temple became desolate when Yeshua raised from the dead, even from the time maybe he spoke this very word before his death. Jerusalem temple was the most set apart place in the world. And he said, your house is left unto you desolate. For I say unto you that ye shall not see me henceforth till ye say, blessed is he that cometh in the name of Yahweh. This is the Sanhedrin. Then we're going to Acts chapter 7 now, verse 1. That Stephen is standing before, trying to, we think, put down the charges and defend himself against these lies. So it's a little confusing now that we look at chapter 7, because he has these charges against him, but look what he starts out to say. Verse 2, chapter 7, verse 2. Men and brethren, fathers, hearken. The Elohim and Master appeared unto our father Abram when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran, and said unto them, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come unto the land which I will show thee. What does that have to do with the charges that are laid before Stephen? What's he talking about here? He goes on almost an hour in this dissertation with apparently no concern or connection to the charges that are laid at his feet. Stoning offenses. Where is he going with all this? Well, let's see. Let's skip some of this. He talks about Abram. Abram's called out. Says he's in verse 5, he's not going to receive any inheritance, but his seed will. And that in verse 8, he gave him covenant of circumcision, called him Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and gave him these covenants. Okay, these are our forefathers of Israel. But it says in verse 9, the patriarchs move with envy. The 12 moved with envy, and they sold Joseph into Egypt. They rebelled against Joseph. Joseph is a forerunner of Yeshua. Joseph is a forerunner, a type of Yeshua, and the brothers were going to kill him, and they finally threw him in a pit, pulled him out, and sold him to the Midianites, and sold him into slavery into Egypt, which, of course, turned to good, Romans 8:28, because he saved the patriarchs and the family by food in the time of the dirge. So he talks about Jacob and Egypt, and they went down to Egypt, and they came out. But before they came out, I want to find this. Let's go to verse 19. Before they came out, Moses was born during that about 40 years or so before they came out. No, 80 years before they came out. And Moses was born. He was raised by the daughter of Pharaoh, and he was taught all the wisdom and understanding and the knowledge of Egypt. And he was a not only a righteous man, he knew that the Hebrews over in Goshen were not only in hard bondage and being afflicted, but those were his people. He knew that. And another king came up after the time of Joseph who didn't know Joseph or the Hebrews understood him. And he dealt craftily in 19, and they put him into bondage and put him in an evil way. Moses was born, he was fair, he was a special child, okay? And down here, in 23, it says, and when he was full 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel over in Goshen. Now, Yahshua did that. He said, I want you to go over there and I want you to see your people. And seeing one of them suffering wrong, he defended him. And one of the Egyptians was beating one of these men. He defended him and avenged him that was oppressed, and he smote, he killed. Smote means to kill. Killed the Egyptian, he buried him in the sand. And he supposed, now this is very important, Moses, before he was called from Midian to go back and get the children out, before he left Egypt, knew that he was the deliverer. Verse 25, and he supposed his brethren would have understood how that Yahweh by his hand, Moses' hand, would have delivered them, but they understood not. Folks, it gets worse. Stephen's going somewhere. He's telling them about Moses. So the next day in verse 26, he says, next day he showed himself unto them as they strove. Now these are two Israelites, two Hebrews, and would have set them at one again, saying, sirs, ye are brethren, why do you wrong one to another? What are you doing this? Here it comes. But he that did his neighbor wrong thrust him away, pushed him away violently, and said, who made thee a ruler and a judge over us? Will you kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday? Verse 28. Then fled Moses at that saying, and he left and went to the land of Midian, because he figured everybody knew, and he was going to be arrested or killed by the Egyptians because he killed one of the Egyptians fighting with the Hebrews. Moses goes on here, and it talks about Moses going to the burning bush. Yahshua spoke to him out of the burning bush. I'm the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Verse 32. Verse 34, he says, I've seen the affliction of my people. I'm going to send you now to bring them out of Egypt. Verse 35, this is important. This Moses, now he's speaking, Stephen is speaking this whole thing now. You have to see the picture. He's standing before the Sanhedrin speaking this. This Moses whom they refused, saying, who made thee a ruler and a judge over us? The same did Yahweh send to be a ruler and a deliverer by the hand of the angel which appeared to him in the bush, to bring them out. Now, Stephen's going somewhere. He's talking about the rebellion, the rebellious, hateful attitude that dwells in some of the people of Israel. Primarily the leaders. Not Moses, but the ones who don't want to follow Yahweh, who are leaders. 37. This is that Moshe. Now, he's going to make a connection. I want to say something. He's talking to Sanhedrin, and he's going to make a connection between Moshe and Yahshua and the rebellion of Israel. He's talking about Moshe and that they rejected him, rebellion. Now he's going to talk about the prophet that Moshe prophesied who would come, that every soul had to listen to, and he's going to connect this to the Sanhedrin and their rebellion and what they're doing and who they are. He's not rambling here. He knows exactly what to say, and this is expired. This is inspired, every word here, by the set-apart Spirit, because it says, when you are pulled before the magistrates and the kings and those places in that time, give no thought to what you will say, because the Spirit will give you the words in that very hour what you will say. This is what's going on right here. Verse 37, this is that Moses which said unto the children of Israel, a prophet shall Yahweh your Elohim raise up unto you and your brethren, like unto me. He'll be like unto me, him shall ye hear. This is he that was in the wilderness with the angel, which spoke to him in Mount Sinai, and with our fathers who received the lively oracles to give us, who received the Torah and the covenants. Now it says, when they came to John the Baptist, they said, are you one of the old prophets? And he said, no. He said, are you that prophet? And he said, no. He said, well, are you the Messiah? He said, no, I am not the Messiah. What did they mean when they said, are you that prophet? When they say that in Matthew, and I think in Luke, talking about John the Baptist, he's talking about the prophet that Moses prophesied would come after him, that all Israel would have to obey. And every soul, every person that did not obey that prophet would be cut off from Israel. You know who that prophet is that he's talking about here? One will rise after me. John said, one is after me, but he's before me, whose shoelaces I'm not even worthy to undo. And they're talking about Yeshua. He's talking about Yeshua, which the builders rejected, to whom our fathers would not obey, but thrust him from them. He's talking about Moses. Israel rejected Moses and didn't obey him, wanted to stone him, all right? Most of them were killed in the wilderness. The leaders were corrupt. They didn't want Moses, and they're not going to listen to the one who came, because they just put the one who was prophesied by Moses to come to death, Yeshua. They made idols, the works of their hands in the desert, talks about there in 40 and 41. And he says now, he's really going to get on them. Here it comes, 43. Ye took up. He said, he's talking to the Sanhedrin and the high priest. You took up the tablet. This is talking about them in the wilderness, but he's talking and accusing them, Israel, and the Sanhedrin. You took up the tabernacle of Molech. You took the star of your Elohim Rephan, which is the Star of David. It's a pagan symbol. And figures which made to worship them. He says, and I will carry you away beyond Babylon because you've done these things. And our fathers had the tabernacle of the witness in the wilderness. They had the tabernacle, but it didn't do them any good. As he had appointed, speaking unto Moshe, that he should make it according to the fashion that he had seen, of course, in the heavenlies. He says now, you know, now he's addressing his charges. He finally gets to it, but he set the scene that Israel has always been rebellious and idolatrous. 47, but Solomon built him a house, howbeit the Most High dwelleth not in temples made with hands, as saith the prophet, because Yahweh says, the heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. What house will you build for me? Where shall be the place of my dwelling or my rest? Have not my hands made all these things? So he's saying that he doesn't live in that temple anymore, which is making things worse, isn't it? Now, before we get to verse 51, which is the heart of the matter here, this is where he's going and where the set-apart Spirit wants him to witness against these Pharisees. The apostles loved Yeshua. They lived with him 3.5 years. They loved him. The ones who came afterward heard all the stories of the apostles. There was nothing written down yet. They loved the ones who heard these verses, these stories, and all these experiences the apostles had, loved the stories and loved Yeshua. And they knew that Israel had been rebellious. They knew the Pharisees were corrupt. And there was a low-level resentment within the apostles and the 120 and the believers and fear of the leadership of that time, because they were corrupt and they would murder, they would kill to get their means or protect their position. They resented that. The Romans were not the enemy, the immediate enemy at the time. It was the Pharisees and the scribes who were pushing the people to go against this new life message from Yeshua. They resented them, and they knew they were corrupt, and they knew they were evil. Stephen did not walk into this assembly before the Sanhedrin with full respect and honor and appreciation and reverence to these men. He resented them. He knew exactly who they were. And, more importantly, he was not afraid. He didn't know he was on a mission, but he's on a mission to bring Saul to conversion, because Saul was consenting to the stoning of Stephen and had great shame and guilt later. But also, Yeshua sent him there to bring a conviction and charges against them and to bring their cup full of wickedness, stoning a righteous man. Another prophet, another righteous man, another believer. Verse 51, here it comes. He just cuts loose now. He can't do this anymore. All this whelms up in him, and his mouth opens, and he says, "You stiff-necked, uncircumcised, you Gentiles, in the heart and ears, ye do always resist the set-apart spirit, as your fathers did, who killed the prophets." Remember what he said? "So ye do. Which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted? And they have slain them that have showed before of the coming of the just one, of whom ye have been now the betrayers and murderers." Murder is number 6 on the marquee. It's a stoning offense. He called them murderers. "Who received the law by the disposition of angels and have not kept it." What did he say? You don't even keep Torah. You're liars. When they heard these things, they were enraged, out of control, enraged, and they gnashed on him with his teeth. They're yelling and screaming at him. But he, being full of the set-apart spirit, looked up steadfastly into heaven, and Yeshua opened the heavens and allowed Stephen to see Yeshua standing at the right side of Yahweh. And he told them that he saw this. And they cried out even the more in verse 57. And they jumped down, ran upon him, jumped down on him in 57, all in one accord, and cast him out, right out of the building, out of the city, and they stoned him. There wasn't even any more witnesses. There wasn't any verdict. There was not due process. They lost control and grabbed him and took him out and killed him. Do you think that everything that Stephen said upon them was correct? I do. We have remnants today of those same leaders in Israel and the Middle East who, if they knew that we kept Torah and that we call on the name which they cannot say because in Jeremiah 44 it was taken away from them, they would want to kill us. It hasn't changed. There's nothing new under the sun, it says in Ecclesiastes. We will always have enemies until Yeshua comes back. We will always have enemies. But this is really about Stephen. Stephen was a beautiful, righteous man that all he wanted to do, like Yeshua, was to heal, to help, to encourage, to build up, to give and pour himself out for someone else, to serve. He was a true servant of the people by the Spirit of Yahweh and Yeshua. Yeshua grieved over this, in the heavens? Doesn't it say, precious and Kodesh is the death of all his saints from this time forth? Yeshua grieved with a terrible grief as the people did over the death of Stephen. We grieve today for the death of Stephen. Stephen just didn't die for the faith. He just didn't die for the will of Yeshua, being a witness against the leadership. Unbeknownst to him, but someday he'll know, he died for Saul. Stephen was stoned here. Let's go to verse 60, chapter 7, verse 60. And he kneeled down and cried with a loud voice, Master, lay not this sin to their charge. And when he had said this, he fell asleep. He died. Verse 1, 8 verse 1. And Saul was consenting unto his death. He was there, holding the coats of many, so they could throw stones. He was consenting unto his death. And when we get to chapter 8, which we don't have time to do, Paul is knocked off his horse after getting orders from the Sanhedrin authority at Damascus, knocked off his horse by Yeshua, given a vision, told that he was persecuting the assembly and him, and he went to Simon by the seaside and abode there 3 or 4 days, fasting, not eating, in terrible grief and shame and horror, realizing that everything he had done to persecute the saints and the killing of Stephen, which he was a part of, was wrong, was exactly opposite of what he should have been doing. So Ananias is called and explained to Hananiah by Yeshua in a vision, he is a chosen vessel. I want you to go to him. I want you to lay hands on him and let him receive the set-apart spirit. He says, he is a chosen vessel unto me to go to the Gentiles and their kings and the nations. Stephen died for Paul. That Paul would come in and do even a greater work than any of the apostles. Any of the other apostles, he's done the greatest work. Which some today, even a man wrote me last week, said, I don't believe in anything that Paul said. You start throwing Paul out, the next person you're going to throw out, because Paul spoke of Yeshua, is Yeshua. Beware of anyone who does not receive the writings of Paul. This isn't about really the wickedness of the Sanhedrin and some of the leaders today in Israel, the Middle East. It's about a man who was full of faith and good works and power, who had no fear and wanted to be a servant of Yeshua. Not a servant of Yahweh, a servant of Yeshua, as we serve Yeshua here, who was willing to give his life for the testimony. And didn't even, like Yeshua, didn't even in the final moments before he slept curse or rail or speak back or condemn. Yeshua said on the stake, forgive them for they know not what they do. And basically, Stephen said the same thing, didn't he? He had no malice against them because he knew they didn't know what they were doing. We just bring this before you today to lift up a great man, Yeshua, and one like him, Stephen. Some of us in the end time may have to be martyred. We don't know when that'll be. But, you know, there's no greater privilege than to be martyred for Yeshua. There's no greater calling. Imagine the love, the appreciation, the reward that Stephen is going to get and acclaim in the kingdom when we see him. We're not working for benefits. We're not working for reward. But it will come anyway, whether we ask for it or want it or not, won't it? We cannot wait to embrace Stephen and the prophets when we see them. What will a man give for his life? And what is a man's life worth? He that seeks to save his life shall lose it. So we don't do that, do we? We seek the truth in Yeshua Messiah. Let's hear the bottom line to all of this. The last verse in chapter 12 of Ecclesiastes says, "Fear Yahweh and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of men." Yeshua and Yahweh bless you and be with you, encourage you, keep you safe, but lead you and your mouth by the set-apart Spirit. Hallelujah.